Let me share with you some data from our most recent sales performance optimization study. Now, what we're really trying to find is what are the challenges facing sales teams, why those problems exist, but more importantly, what do you do about it? How can you leverage people, process, technology, and knowledge differently to really increase sales effectiveness? Now, to go back in those studies, because we've got data over a long period of time, if we go back to 2009, we really saw sales performance tank. The 77.9% number here is the average overall plan attainment that we saw across the 1,000-plus companies we surveyed in terms of what happened to them in 2008. We understand at the end of that year, the economy tanked all the way around the world. Sales ran into, just roadblocks on, how do I close deals? And it really did impact, sales effectiveness. We just saw a plummeting in the overall plan attainment. Only 51% of reps made quota that year. That's the lowest on record in the history of our study. And so people got serious about sales. And they started coming back and, okay, we've really got to start looking at what we're doing, how we're doing it. We've got to understand what the customers are doing. And as they started focusing on increasing their visibility into the sales cycle, things got better, to the point where we actually got back up to 89.2% of overall plan attainment in 2012. Now, a lot of people sit there and say, how come we didn't get to 100? Most companies over-assign quotas. So the actual number that they're telling Wall Street is not the overall plan number. But you can see here there was a good increase. We got back up. People started hitting it. And again, we got back to where 62% of reps were making quota, up from that 51% number. But then all of a sudden, something started to happen the last couple of years. Maybe we got a little complacent. Maybe we're not focused as much as we should. But in our last study that we just completed and released in February 1st of this year, we're back down to 81.4% of overall plan attainment. So clearly something's happening in the sales process today, or in the buying process, or the way we're engaging customers, because we're just not as effective as we need to be. Yet in the face of those numbers, I want to share with you that 94.5% of the companies we surveyed said we're raising our revenue targets for 2015. And sometimes I feel like I'm the coach of a high jump team, where my guys are struggling to clear 6 feet, and I'm going to raise the bar to 6'6". So what do I expect to happen? The guys who are struggling aren't going to make it. Some of the guys who are just clearing it aren't going to make it. So it's really this issue of what's going to be different. So the key thing is we spent a lot of time at the end of last year figuring out what the number was going to be for 2015. I wonder how many companies spent time figuring out how their reps were going to achieve that number, because that's really the struggling issue, is how are you going to make it?
And hey, I'll tell you, Jim, it's Mark. I'm seeing now, engaging with customers in 2015, that this melee is not gone, and in fact, in some cases, is getting worse. And they are asking the question, what do we do?
Yeah, I think it really is an issue of execution. And, I think in sales we use a lot of sports analogies, so forgive me for doing one. But I started thinking about this in preparation for this webinar, this is all about winning the game. And so I started taking a look at, well, let's take a look at, maybe sports. Is there something we can learn from sports as an analogy for this? And something that came across as we were kind of brainstorming it around with the team was the idea of, in football, there's this thing called, the red zone. That's when you get within inside your opponent's 20-yard line. And so the thing as they measure there, one of the key metrics is, did you score or not? You got close to the goal line. You should get some points on the board. What really happened? And in taking a look at the 2014 NFL schedule, went back and said, okay, who is the best professional football team at red zone effectiveness? Turns out it was the Dallas Cowboys. They had 51 times during the course of the season that they got inside of their opponent's red zone. 92.2% of the time, they got points. 17 times it was a field goal. At least it was points on the board. The rest of the time it was, a touchdown. And so that's the type of execution. When you've got a professional football team, they're going out and executing the plays exactly what you told them to do it. You expect them to go in, not score all the time, but boy, score the majority of the time. So let me share with you again the numbers from the sales performance optimization study that we just finished. When we took a look at sales teams, we averaged what was the average win rate of forecast deals across all the companies we surveyed. So forecast, not pipeline. These are things where you're in the red zone. You've got far enough into the process where you say, hey, I'm willing to commit this is going to win. Win rate came in at 45.9%. So half of what the Dallas Cowboys were doing in terms of their scoring efficiency. To put that in perspective, if you go down to Vegas, you walk into a Bellagio, you walk up to the craps tables, you make a bet on a pass bet at the craps tables, your odds of winning are 49.3%. And when I first heard that, I went, seriously? The odds of winning a craps are better than they are in terms of closing a forecast that, by the way, we created. So it really does give us, an issue to pause and say, what are we going to have to do to really increase the effectiveness of our teams so when they get in the red zone in the sales process, they actually end up scoring?
Jim, it's interesting because that's an average, right? I'm working with one customer right now who's telling me that they get in the red zone. That's the call, right? They're forecasting they're going to close business. And last quarter, they came in 15% of the call. 15%. Ouch. Amazing.
Well, that's the type of thing where you're going to be buying mail-ox for the rest of your company, because how do you work in an unpredictable environment? If you're the VP of Finance, how do you go and manage lines of credit? What do you tell Wall Street if you're in charge of customer support? Are we going to be implementing things for customers or not? So there's just a lot of implications on that for the rest of the enterprise as well as for sales.